so we will go to the Law and Licensing Committee. Board Member Belknap, if you want to take that. Bolter, I'm sorry.
Oh, I knew what you meant.
I'm gonna.
I answers to whatever. Okay, so Utah State Hospital Youth Center Program and contract recommendations. This was just a committee discussion. The Law and Licensing Committee heard from Brian Olmsted and Steve Kalin, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, who presented the contract recommendations from the Utah State Hospital Review Committee for future USBE management of the Utah State Hospital Educational Program. And the MOU will be obtainable in the consent calendar. Updates to USBE Data Governance Plan, Policy 3006. The Law and Licensing Committee heard from staff about updates incorporated into the USBE Data Governance Plan, along with a few other minor changes. Board Member Lisa Cummins moved that the committee approve the updates to the Board Policy 3006. Motion passed unanimously. Motion for the board is that the Law and Licensing Committee move that the board approve the updates incorporated into Board Policy 3006, USBE Data Governance Plan.
Okay, so the motion is to approve the updates incorporated into the Board Policy 3006 USBE Data Governance Plan. Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes.
Okay. Data sharing agreement. We had two agreements come before us. The first one was from the Utah Department of Health, Office of the Medical Examiner. And the Law and Licensing Committee heard from staff and also from the medical examiner, both Michael Staley and Eric Christensen, and also Representative Steve Elison was there. Member Belknap moved that the committee approve the Utah Department of Health, Office of the Medical Examiner data sharing agreement request to collect, analyze, and retain information on individuals who have died within the state of Utah, and specifically collect, analyze, and retain information related to individuals who have died by suicide. Motion passed 4-1. The motion before the board is that the Law and Licensing Committee moves that the board approve the Utah Department of Health, Office of the Medical Examiner data sharing agreement request to collect, analyze, and retain information on individuals who have died within the state of Utah, specifically collect, analyze, and retain information related to individuals who have died by suicide. So that's the motion that came out of committee. However, there's been some more information that has come out, and so now I move that the board refer the
Sorry, just
UDOH.
1 second.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Oh,
so,
sorry.
okay. So the motion before the board is to approve the Utah Department of Health, Office of the Medical Examiner data sharing agreement request for to collect, analyze, and retain information on individuals who have died within the state of Utah, and specifically collect, analyze, and retain information related to individuals who have died by suicide. Is there any discussion to that motion? Board Member Bolter?
Yes, because of new information that's come out from the legislature, and I believe Dave Thomas will explain that, I move that the board refer the UDOH, Office of the Medical Examiner data sharing agreement, back to the Law and Licensing Committee.
Okay, so then is that an amendment to them? An additional motion, okay. So the motion is to move this agreement back to the Law and Licensing Committee for discussion. Okay, that was seconded. Is there any discussion to that motion? Board Member Lear.
I'd like to have a short explanation of why that's necessary.
Okay.
Dave?
I'd be
Thomas?
glad to do that. The agreement that came out of the committee, there were some concerns about some of the language, particularly the language with regard to the permission under FERPA to be able to share the information and to have that exemption. Mike Bell, who was negotiating it, proposed some additional language to the medical examiner, who declined to accept the additional language to it, and at the same time was also informed and there was an indication that the legislature was going to take up the issue of the medical examiner being able to receive data and information from from those places. So because of this additional legislative concern about that, and the fact that the legislature can fix the statute so that it removes any ambiguity that might be found under the agreement or the language of the agreement, it looked like it might be a good idea to postpone it for that legislative action to see if that can be completed.
So can I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
So is the idea that the legislature wants that information to be provided and so would modify the statute to make that more clearly possible? Is that
That's
the point?
exactly the point, is that they would remove any of the ambiguity. The question was whether or not parental consent was going to be necessary for all of the information that was provided. They were going to clarify that to make sure that they could receive that information as stipulated. So it seemed that what that would do is that would remove any ambiguity, any particular conflict that agreement might create because of the interpretation under the statutes.
Thanks for the explanation.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, the motion is to refer the Utah Department of Health Office of Medical Examiner data sharing agreement to the Law and Licensing Committee. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes.
And then the other data sharing agreement was Voices for Utah Children. Board member Brittany Cummins moved to approve the Voices for Utah Children data sharing agreement request for de-identified student level data. Motion failed 1-4. Advisory group data recommendations to the Student Data Protection Act. The committee heard updates from staff about the Student Data Protection Act advisory groups, and that's what it was just a committee update. R277-613, LEA bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, and harassment policy. Yes.
Okay, sorry. Board
I
Member Lear?
just had a question before you move on to a rule. I wanted to know, what the votes were under the Voices for Utah Children, and what kind of a short synopsis of what the concerns were, why we didn't want to share that with Voices for Utah Children that does such a great job for Utah children.
Okay, let me go back to it. There actually isn't a synopsis on here, so I'll have to remember. Oh, okay. And then the people that voted against it were Board Member Bolter, Warner, Lisa Cummins, and Belknap.
And 4 was,
Brittany Cummins. And then, yeah.
Board Member Warner?
I can just share with you my concern. My concern is that they are a lobbying group, and my concern is if they're registered as a lobbying group and we start giving them information, is that going to open the door that we would have to give other lobbying groups information? And at what point do we have to not do it? Can we say no? It's information that they're requesting that they can get from this office without. They can get it through reports like everybody else. So that was just my concern, is that we're opening a door with lobbying groups and giving them information that maybe others may not have right away.
and follow up to that, Brittany.
Yes.
Did that committee leave it open or discuss with Voices for Utah Children how they might bring a different presentation or different request back and maybe present it differently or ask for less?
I think what it was they were told they could contact the different departments here and get the information.
Can you speak more?
Oh, sorry.
into your-
They were told they could contact, for example, if they want kindergarten or early reading, early childhood information, they could contact Jennifer. Or if they wanted licensing issues, or information, they could contact Travis. So they were told to contact the programs or the departments directly for the information.
And I'll raise my hand. Sorry, can never get used to this. Sorry, but I think from my perspective, I think their intents were good, but me personally, if I was to hear a more articulated plan of what the data would be used for, I think it would be beneficial for their cause, because it was pretty vague as to what the data would be used for and how they would communicate any analysis of that data. And so I think any group that is looking for data, I think having a well-articulated plan as to what that would be used for, how they would communicate it and move forward, I think would be beneficial for committee considerations. That was my take on that discussion.
One final short question. Who made that presentation for Voices for Utah Children? Was it a young man?
No.
No. It was, I think she was a new hire, or she'd only been in the position for a little while, but I don't remember her name.
Come forward, please.
Sorry, I'm looking it up. So hi, I'm Whitney Phillips, Chief Privacy Officer here. I have to introduce myself every time, right? The woman that presented, let's see. Sorry. Let's see. It's going to take me a minute.
You know,
Sorry, it'll take me a minute.
I can get it later. I
Okay.
just would like to contact them because I found their research, just 30 seconds of, it was a Voices for Utah Children, who was one of the original plaintiffs in the school fees lawsuit. So they do good work, and I would like to help them if possible. So you can get it to me later, Whitney.
Okay, I'll do that.
And a contact number if you have it.
Okay, well, sorry.
Okay, Board Member Bolter, if you can continue.
Back to R277-613. In December, the Law and Licensing Committee referred the rule back to the Bullying Prevention Subgroup for further work. The Bullying Prevention Subgroup met again to simplify the rule. The Law and Licensing Committee heard R277-613 Revision 5 updates from staff and Bullying Prevention work group feedback. Board Member Lisa Cummins moved that the committee approve and continue R277-613 Revision 5 with an additional amendments, making it Revision 6. On first reading, motion passed unanimously. The Law and Licensing Committee moves that the board approve and continue R277-613 Revision 6 on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before the board is that we approve R277-613 Revision 6 on second and final reading. Okay, any discussion to that motion? Board Member Lear.
I heard some of this discussion, and my concern and frustration with that discussion was that there were many changes made to that rule that had been the product of 5 months of work in 10 minutes. And I perhaps would like, I don't know who could speak to, it's on the agenda again, I guess, for tomorrow. Is that right?
Yes, and I believe Carol has, yeah, she has an amendment.
Just one?
Board Member Lear, are you?
Well,
okay?
I would like to hear maybe, maybe the amendment will help, but I would maybe like to hear an explanation from
Okay.
Ms. Stallings about what
Okay,
we're going to do about this.
okay, Board Member Warner.
I would like to make a motion that we bring up, that we look at revision 7 and that we substitute that for revision 6, and we can have Angie explain and walk us through that. I think it will help Board Member Lear with some of her questions.
Okay, so,
She made the motion to get it.
okay, so the
motion
is there
is
a second?
is to accept revision 7.
Second.
Okay, so the motion before us is to substitute revision 7 for revision 6. Is there any discussion to that amendment? Board Vice Chair Ellis.
Deputy Superintendent Stallings,
Yes.
you're putting that up on the screen, but are you also putting it in board docs?
Yes, I've just asked somebody to go tell them to
Thank you.
post it since there's been a confusion in the past if we post it too early. And so now that Board Member Warner's made that motion, I just asked somebody to go ask either Sherry or Sybil or Lorraine, if you have it, to post it. So just a moment, and I will project it until they have it posted. All right. So revision 7, and you'll see once it's posted to board docs, will look like this, and it'll have board member Warner's name on there, so that it shows that it's clearly an amendment, not necessarily what the committee adopted. So unfortunately, and I have to apologize in advance for not being there last month, but I was very sick. Some of the discussion and the motions made in law and licensing last month were actually actions that the committee had taken in prior months and then reversed their actions due to some input that we received from our LEAs. So the first thing the committee had done was included the word harassment throughout the rule. And the bill last year, so the primary reason this rule was coming forward, and it's actually been before the committee, I think, since either August or September, is that the last year bill took harassment and bullying and combined them into one term. And so if you look at the statute prior to the bill that passed last year, bullying essentially was a physical act. Harassment was an emotional or a verbal act. The bill last year combined so that the new definition of bullying includes written, verbal, or physical acts. So it includes what formerly was covered under harassment. And so if we were to include harassment throughout the rule, we would need to set a definition or standard for harassment. And there's no definition for harassment in statute or in the rule. And so my recommendation was, because somebody asked, couldn't we still use harassment? Yes, if we had a standard for it that was something other than the bullying definition that's currently in code. So that discussion was actually had by the Law and Licensing Committee back in August, September. But of course, since the committee is changed over, it makes sense that they wouldn't have been following that former discussion. The second thing the committee did was include abusive conduct in the body of the rule. And we also had done that in November or December, I can't remember which. And LEA attorneys said you have to keep student issues and employee issues separate. So they asked that we put all of the abusive conduct issues in one section at the bottom of the rule, which we did. And so revision 6, by putting the abusive conduct in the middle of the rule with the student issues, creates some confusion. So essentially, what revision 7 is it's revision 5, which is kind of a history of all the work that the committee and the bullying prevention subgroup has done. And it includes there is one change that the committee made last month, which had not been addressed by the committee before, and was a great, I guess I'm not making a policy judgment there, but it was a good addition, and I apologize, I'm trying to get to it. It's where we were talking about parental consent, and the committee added if applicable, and that seems like a good thing to keep along with revision 5. So that gives you the history of revision 5, what happened with revision 6, and maybe why you may want to, if you want revision 6, to maybe bring it back to committee to continue to discuss, or revision 7 is ready, which is essentially what the committee's work had been up until January.
Board Member Lear?
I just want to be crystal clear then. Yes or no answer is fine. So revision 7 is revision 5 with if applicable added.
That is correct.
Perfect. Thank you.
Board Member Cummins, do you have a comment?
Yes. Thank you, Vice Chair. I think the discussion we had last in January, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chair Bolter and Board Member Warner, was that harassment, sexual harassment, sexual predator needed to be outlined, more defined as, and separated from the bullying aspect, because bullying, we think physical, right? Or harassment in that regard, but with sexual predatory actions or abuse and such forth, I think needed to have been further defined. So that's why we had added it back in. So if we need to add more definition there, I think it should be, just so that it's clear and not emitted from the definition.
Go ahead, Superintendent Dixon.
So I think actually what, part of what you're stating is actually some of the, I guess, the discussion that the legislature had when they made this determination to combine harassment and bullying. And I think that legally, and I guess this is where maybe it should go back to committee for further discussion, but if you look at the actual definition in statute, it does talk about a verbal act which causes physical or emotional harm. It's got the hostile, threatening, humiliating, abusive educational environment due to, if you look on lines 70 through 74, those are all the same elements of harassment. What the legislature decided to do, though, was to get rid of the term harassment and include the same elements that used to be in harassment and move it into bullying. And there are policy reasons for that. It used to be, like you said, bullying was purely physical, but our current state standard and code says that bullying has now been kind of enhanced or expanded to include verbal, emotional. And so I guess one thing I would offer to you is I believe that what used to be harassment, or what people think of as harassment, is still covered. It's just now called bullying. And so the question is, what would the harassment look like that isn't already covered in bullying, the term bullying? So, because we could add a definition of harassment, it would completely go against the whole policy of what Senator Escamilla's bill did last year, because that was the whole, but I'm not saying we couldn't legally do it. We just need to we need to set that standard of what does harassment mean.
Vice Chair Ellis.
Yes, and it may also trigger, I mean, no one's scared of it, but it might also trigger concerns at the Legislative Rules Committee if it goes backwards from what her bill language changed last year.
Board Member Lear.
And I thought, as I recall our many discussions, it also raised some issues of federal law, competing federal law. Was that right too? Or am I remembering differently?
I'm trying to remember.
Because there were that would introduce some new elements that would make it more complicated to define and to be able for LEAs to be able to act appropriately.
I think one of the things you could have is LEAs not being sure of something that fits both harassment and bullying, whether they categorize it as harassment or bullying. Whereas right now in our reporting systems, everything that we've required to be reported is related to bullying, and notices to parents based on bullying. And so in order to have the effect, if we wanted harassment to be used throughout the system, we probably need to make some other statutory changes regarding parental notice and other things too. So.
Brief follow-up. And as I recall, now this is coming back to me. Harassment triggers some required federal procedures that are different than what we have in state law. Not better or worse, but just different. And this keeps it cleaner.
Okay, then there's no further discussion. The motion is to amend, by saying we're going to go with revision 7 rather than revision 6. So that is the amendment. So if we would vote on the amendment. Correct, Lorraine? Okay, thank you. All in favor of that amendment? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so then we're back to the original motion, which is to approve and continue R277613 revision 7 on second and final reading. Okay, is there any further discussion to that motion? Okay, then all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so that passes. Okay.
Okay, R277-709, Education Program Serving Youth in Custody. The Law and Licensing Committee heard from staff explaining the proposed amendments and continuation of R277-709 Draft 1. Member Brittany Cummins moved that the committee approve and continue R277-709 Draft 1 on first reading. Motion passed unanimous. The Law and Licensing Committee moves that the board approve and continue R277-709 Draft 1 on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before us is to approve and continue R277-709 Draft 1 on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes.
Okay, R277-116, Audit Procedure. The Law and Licensing Committee discussed proposed amendments to R277-16, both Draft 2 and Draft 3. Staff presented and proposed changes and the reason behind the edits, giving more clarity to the rule. Board Member Belknap moved that the committee approve R277-116 Draft 3 on second reading. Motion passed unanimously. The Law and Licensing Committee moves that the board approve R277-116 Draft 3 on third and final reading.
The motion before us is to approve R277-116 Draft 3 on third and final reading. Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes.
R277-719, Standard for Selling Foods Outside of the Reimbursable Meal in Schools. It's up for continuation and 5-year review. The Law and Licensing discussed the continuation of the rule. It was amended to provide some technical, conforming, and stylistic changes in accordance with the rule writing manual for Utah. Board Member Brittany Cummins moved that the committee approve and continue R277-719 Draft 1 on first reading. Motion passed unanimously. The Law and Licensing Committee moves that the board approve and continue R277-719 Draft 1 on second and final reading.
The motion before us is to approve and continue R277-719 Draft 1 on second and final reading. Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes.
R277-518, Career and Technical Education License. The Law and Licensing Committee discussed the proposed continuation of this rule in March. Staff asked the Law and Licensing Committee to continue the rule and bring the rule back after the Licensing Task Force finishes its work. Board Member Belknap moved that the committee approve the continuation of R277-518 on first reading. Motion passed unanimously. The Law and Licensing Committee moves that the board approve and the continuation of R277-518 on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before us is to approve the continuation of R277-518 on second and final reading. Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes.
Okay, board bylaws. The Law and Licensing Committee and staff discussed updates to sections 9 through 11 of the board bylaws, as well as any needed changes in section 12 of the bylaws to complete the committee's ongoing review. Staff will work on discussed amendments and bring back an updated draft. Board Member Belknap moved that the committee approve amendments to sections 9 through 11 of the board bylaws. Motion passed unanimously. The Law and Licensing Committee moves that the board approve amendments to sections 9 through 11 of the board bylaws.
The motion before us is to approve the amendments to sections 9 through 11 of the board bylaws. Is there any discussion to that motion? Board Member Hanson.
I have an amendment. And Lorraine can probably explain this a little bit better, but we have advisory committees that advise us on things, TAC, UC, all of those advisory committees. About 2 years ago, I was in charge of a a task force that worked for 2 years to find them all because they got lost. We didn't know which ones we had or where they were, or, anyway, so it took us a long time, Lorraine and I, a long time to find them and the task force to find them. And then we put them in the bylaws so that they wouldn't get lost again. And they inadvertently got taken out with this last change. And so Lorraine has asked that I amend the bylaws to reinstate section 10J and L.
Is there a second to that amendment?
Second.
Okay. So the amendment is to reinstate section 10J and L. Is that correct? Is it possible for the board to see that?
I would imagine somehow.
So we just had some requests.
Isn't it already in there?
Yes,
just-
it's in
we
there, it's crossed
accidentally
out,
removed
so it's
something
just
that we
what would
weren't
be
supposed
crossed
to.
out.
Okay.
Would be
Is there
back
any-
in.
Are there any questions? Okay, so the amendment is to reinstate section 10J and L. Is there any further discussion to that? Board Vice Chair Ellis?
You don't see any that would be missing on that list?
Not at this moment.
No.
If so, we can
amend it.
revisit it. I think there's one duplication, and I think that, we would just take care of the duplication.
Okay, all in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that passes. Then back to the original motion, which was to approve amendments to sections 9 through L of the board bylaws, including the reinstatement of section 10J and L. Is there any further discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes.
And that's it.
Okay, thank you.